pressure the Zionist regime to end the occupation, the illegal occupation of Palestinian territory after stopping the genocide. And it has been so successful that a few years ago, Netanyahu came to the U.S. and declared that the two existential threats facing Israel were Iran and BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions. So I urge people to go to, I think it's bds.org, and get involved. It can have a real, tangible impact.
Thank you. And there's a question. You have the tip box on the website still, and perhaps, Brad, you could speak to that.
Yes, absolutely. So if you go to the merchantsofdeath.org website, we do have an anonymous tip box there. So if people have information and want to provide, please do so. We look at that every day. We've gotten some wonderful information over the past few years from them. So again, merchantsofdeath.org, there is an anonymous tip box there.
Great. And yeah, that's under the contact page, and then people will see it. And Nick, you have a hand up.
Yes, I want to note that we have also a podcast called Merchants of Death Radio. And so this is a way for us to keep putting out information. And so the question about additional evidence is very, very important because we will have a way of communicating with people, interviewing as well as providing evidence that we've already gathered. And that's available at merchantsofdeath.org, and we'll be advertising that more on social media. I should say also that we will be in touch with groups that Bill mentioned and try to be in touch with prosecutors in other countries to aid them in what we hope will be a legal prosecutorial offensive for those CEOs that Rania was so appropriately mentioning. And finally, I just would like to say there are Merchants of Death factories throughout this country, and we have one here where I live in Northampton, Massachusetts, and we will be doing more to disrupt their daily activities, and we are at a point where disruption of these places is absolutely essential. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are just on the hour mark, but we have some more questions coming in. I think we can extend the time of this event, and if anyone has to leave, we will send out the recording afterwards. But there was an interesting question about, it says, assuming most of the atrocities in recent years are from the U.S., given its activities and funding, how does the U.S. war crimes compare to those of other superpowers like Russia, China, the U.K. in recent years? If so, what makes them distinct or uniquely U.S.? So I think that's an interesting question, and it sometimes arises in our work at World Beyond War because we do focus so much on the impact of the U.S. military empire, which is so much larger than any other military empire. But yeah, is there any discussion of the comparison? Oh, Kathy has a hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I do want to call attention to the constant work that World Beyond War devotes to putting more detail into the map that shows the bases all around the world. And it doesn't only show the U.S. bases. The constancy of the work has now involved detailing the bases in other countries. And, you know, we aren't trying to say that anybody gets a pass. Any merchant of death, anybody manufacturing, selling, storing, preparing to use weaponry is in violation of human decency, of the possibility of prolonging life on the planet. We condemn all merchants of death. It is important to look at the Stockholm Peace Research Institute's very careful listing every year, at the end of every year, that shows the scale at which the United States exports weapons far beyond what anyone else is guilty of. And so here in the United States, I think we have to hold up that mirror, look at ourselves in the mirror, look at the people that are moving into governmental positions. And very importantly, when we acknowledge also those who are warmongers and war profiteers in other countries, we have to try not to demonize. And that's difficult because demonic things are happening all the time. War is evil, and war isn't over when it's over. But if we allow any country to convince its citizenry that they face such a huge and monstrous evil in another country, and therefore they have to pick up the sword and go to war, it makes no more sense than what David Swanson frequently points out was the means of choice when there were disputes hundreds of years ago. Two people would each arm themselves with a pistol, take 12 steps in the opposite direction, turn around and shoot each other. Well, dueling is no longer done, but warfare, the way it's practiced today, is even more lunatic, more insane. So we want to say, as the World Beyond War t-shirt says, I'm already against the next war, anywhere.
Absolutely. And David, did you have something to add?
Well, I agree enthusiastically with Kathy, as I usually do, but I think it's important that we recognize how unfathomably, horrendously evil is war making and war preparations and war antagonization by numerous governments on Earth, and that they all exaggerate the horrors of each other, and that trying to pick the one that's good and the one that's bad is a fool's errand. But if you're going to look for the one country that is the elephant in the room, that ships and sells and markets weapons to the rest of the world, outpacing just about the entire rest of the world, that spends on its own military just about outpacing the rest of the world, that applies enormous pressure on other governments to increase their military spending, that is now absurdly talking about 5% of an economy has to go into military spending, that has at least 70% of the world's foreign military bases, that uniquely has divided the world into zones to dominate every sphere of the earth, plus outer space, plus cyberspace. I mean, you can't get away from the fact that it's the U.S. government that is the biggest outlier, shredder, and violator of treaties, that is the leading enemy of international law, that sanctions the International Criminal Court, or at least passes it through one branch of its legislature on the same day that it demands the overthrow of a government in Venezuela, that openly backs coups and unilaterally sanctions governments, and again, yesterday puts up a guy for Secretary of War who says the Geneva Conventions should be trashed, international law should be abandoned, people need to be able to shoot and kill more freely. Every member of Hamas that nobody asks him to define who that is needs to be killed, and they're going to approve him. And so it's no question that if you're going to pick a government to start with, it's the one in Washington.
Thank you. And Rania?
Yes, thank you, David. 100%. And I want to add to that, when we think about merchants of death, I'd love for us to think bigger than the literal weapons manufacturers, because we have seen a marriage between the weapons manufacturers and the tech industry, and particularly alternative, artificial intelligence and the whole surveillance tech industry. And I would put them with the merchants of death. So let's keep an eye out on how tech, AI, that whole surveillance technology is being increasingly used to target and kill people. And link that to how that's also going to be used more and more powerfully and destructively by U.S. police departments in their ongoing marriage, not only with the tech industry, but also with the military.
Thank you. Nick?
Yes, thank you, Rania. I just wanted to say that in that regard, there are companies like Palantir, Anduril. These are new, quote unquote, high-tech companies that are constantly pushing boundaries of surveillance and killing in a very new and dangerous way. And when we talk about repression by other governments of other people, these weapons are going to be leading the way for cheaper, easier ways for other governments to repress people in an advance of extraction of resources from what we call the poorest parts of the world. And so where are these weapons coming from? They're coming from the United States, they're coming from Israel, they're coming from higher tech countries, and so we have a repeat of a kind of slavery colonialism that is being imposed, and this has to be stopped if we're concerned about the killing by other governments, because this technology is where it's going. I'm very involved with the organizing to stop weaponized drones around the world, because that's on the cutting edge of surveillance and killing for repression and colonialism. But so it's not just we want to stop these 4 particular manufacturers, but they're emblematic of a high-tech regime of repression and killing that is really raging right now. So thank you.
Thanks, Nick. We'll try to squeeze in a few more questions. So Daniel Shea from VFP asks, why did the panel not also include the attack on Iraq in 1991 by George H.W. Bush? Was that included in the tribunal's investigation?
Commentary leading up to the attack on Iraq, and Kathy Kelly had a lot of experience with that, and Kathy, you may want to talk about that.
Well, thanks, Nick. Yes, we did in our tribunal investigation talk about the first Gulf War and the ways in which that war began with George Bush saying, we will never allow a larger country to invade a smaller country. And he was referring to Iraq having invaded Kuwait. Well, the United States had assembled a huge arsenal, massive numbers of military equipment and aerial invasion preparation, and the 1991 Gulf War wiped out every electrical facility all across Iraq. And then after that, after the sewage and sanitation systems were debilitated and the incidences of gastroenteritis and dehydration and starvation began to attack children, then the United States engaged in an even more brutal, an even more lethal kind of warfare, the economic warfare. Rania and I first met each other working hard to try to stop those economic sanctions, to defy the economic sanctions, but the United States bullied the United Nations and forced through 13 years of punitive sanctions whose main target were hundreds of thousands of children under age 5. And I think that this gave the green light. It set the stage for ongoing, forever wars. And as Nick has said, other countries can look to the United States and say, well, it works for them to break the law. Why should we obey it? But let us not give up on the United Nations, on the General Assembly, and also on each of ourselves as sovereign people who have a capacity, a potential to take action. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. There's a question from Martha. Can FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, be applied to APAC?
I wonder if Marjorie could speak to that.
I'm afraid I'm not an expert in that area. We'll have to decline at this point.
From my limited understanding of it, I'm not a lawyer, I've just read on it. There is a legal application of it. The question becomes a political question. How can we do it politically? How can we ramp it up politically so that we actually have congressional representatives that have a backbone and that have a conscience, rather than the vast majority who are bought off by the weapons industry and by APAC in that order? So then the question becomes, in terms of how do we do that? Well, first, can we build the narrative that APAC is a foreign agent? Can we build that in our public talks in our letters, in our media, in our representation, because critical to liberating ourselves from the weapons industry is liberating ourselves from the narratives that they have presented to us as mainstream. So how do we reclaim that narrative? So I would answer for that question, the how of that begins by raising it as an issue in the public sphere, and then seeing who can we get in Congress who can then uplift it. In North Carolina, we have one congressional representative who is honorable, only one, but we have one, and that one is Representative Alma Adams from Charlotte. We have one. Who's the one that you have in your state, or who's the one that you can get in your state that you can hold on to? And then we can build it forward. And if you don't have one in the state, think about who do you have in your city? Who do you have in your county? How do we organize really small? And we organize that way by building relationships and trying to get changes implemented on a city and county level in our state if we don't have those state congressional representatives that are decent and honorable.
Thank you. Nick, and then David?
Yes, very briefly. I'm going to suggest that everybody on the call today actually watch the episodes of the War Crimes Tribunal. It's a lot to watch in a certain way. But if you watch the episodes that have to do with the attacks in these various parts of the world, I think you'll be very motivated to bring this information forward to people and to use it to make alliances with people locally, with students. There's a great deal of repression of students right now. And here in Northampton, we're actually going to be protesting at Smith College and other colleges. And there's a woman, Jennifer Scarlett, who is part of our group, wrote a letter to the president of Smith College. It says basically take your foot off the necks of your students, because in talking with students, we found that in this new semester, many of them are afraid of just basically losing the access to education, because if they get bounced out of Smith College, there's an educational combine that will prevent them from going into other schools that they're qualified to go into. So we've got a very serious problem of repression in this country right now, and it's really not up to only the students to correct this. And it's absolutely shameful that the academic community is not going to the defense of students under these circumstances. But to go back again to say, please do watch these episodes and have other people watch them, and then there will be for me personally, working on this, I learned a lot about cumulatively what the United States has been doing piecemeal to destroy lives wholesale around the world. And once you feel that viscerally, you're going to be highly motivated. Thank you.